So how does depression change the brain? In this video, I'm going to be discussing my own personal experience along with some, psychology facts that I know. And from there, I'm going to give a bit of advice about how I overcame depression. And yeah. So we should start with, what is depression? And it's ultimately just a series of negative thought patterns that ultimately lead to its symptoms, such as hopelessness, feelings of persistent sadness, fatigue, what have you. And for most people, these negative thought patterns usually start off in childhood, usually due to, certain types of trauma. In my case, it was a little different. I didn't get depression from any childhood traumas. Rather, I got it from contracting Lyme disease. And for those who don't know, Lyme disease crosses the blood-brain barrier, and one of the biggest symptoms it causes is depression. And it's so significant, actually, that the majority of deaths caused by Lyme disease are suicide. So, my case is a little different because I had about 25 years of my life without getting depression, then suddenly I started experiencing it. And when I did, I didn't initially understand what was happening to me. I was dealing with the physical symptoms of the condition, and my biggest goal at that time was to overcome those. And once I did, I ended up experiencing a series of depressive symptoms. And being that I had never experienced them before, I didn't know what I was going through. And I kind of just assumed it had to do with just getting over a chronic illness. I felt like my body was probably just tired, and my mind was just fatigued from it all. It was a bunch of panic attacks too while I was going through that condition, and so I didn't think much of it at the time. And initially, I remember it started as a high functioning depression, you can call it. I was working full time. I had a relationship. I had a social circle, and I was maintaining all these things while dealing with the symptoms. So it started off, not terrible, but it wasn't long before it snowballed. And I remember how these negative thought patterns snowballed. They started off with just simple dislikes about myself and my life, where it was at the time. I felt like I should have accomplished more, and I felt like I had made decisions in my near past that I wasn't proud of, and I wasn't proud of myself, period. And initially, like I said, it was manageable, but as those types of thoughts continued in my brain, they just became more intense and more intense. And it got to this point where I felt like I was in this very isolated place. And I think that's one thing about depression, that I think a lot of people understand it, but they don't understand how isolated a person feels when they're in it. Because I just remember when I was in it, I felt like nobody could relate to what I was going through, because what I was going through was so fucking personal, it was so unique to me. And nobody has had my life experience, and so you just feel really isolated. I mean, that's no other way to put it. And I remember when I started developing suicidal thoughts, it was more than, this felt like the only escape. It felt like there was nothing here on earth that could tie me down and kind of create that connection I had with the world previously. And I think this is like ultimately what I want to get across in this video of how depression works in the brain. Is it skews it. It changes, natural processes that a healthy person is used to. Things like reassurance, for example. A healthy person knows how to reassure themselves, how to carry themselves, through day-to-day life. And when things go a little complicated, they know how to reassure themselves. And, but when you have depression, it's difficult to reassure yourself. And that's just one element of a million emotions you could be experiencing that depression is just screwing with. So, it's difficult. It's very difficult. When so many of your emotions are screwed up, and it just gets confusing on how to go about rearranging them back to their proper places. And for men, I think this is even more so because men are largely more alone in this world, and more expected to rely on themselves. And that was my case ultimately too. I mean, the girl I was with at the time, she left me, and I was suddenly on my own accord, and I had to deal with it myself. And I woke up quick that nobody was going to come save me. I could only save myself, and it's difficult. It's really difficult. It's not something that you can just wake up and do one day. It takes time, it takes effort, and it takes years. I'm still working through certain things. I've largely gotten to a point where I feel confident coming on camera and speaking about it, but I'm still working through certain things that are just so deep within me and were just brought out by this condition. But anyways, I am going to share just a few of the ways that I overcame depression. But in order to do that, we gotta go somewhere else. So this is part of the secret sauce. Throughout my recovery process, I spent just a lot of time coming out here alone and just being one-on-one with nature. I don't know, it might just be a personal preference, but I just feel like I think more clearly out here. I can get a better idea of what my thoughts are, where they're coming from. And, my personal beliefs, I just feel like it's a easier way to speak to God, and that's where I get the majority of my direction from in life at this point. Anyways, this wasn't all there was to it. One of the biggest things that I mentioned earlier is depression is a loop of negative thoughts. So your mind is moving in a negative direction, and it keeps barreling in that direction, and it's like a snowball effect. And with that said, the opposite is also true. And when I first realized that was like, one of the biggest turning points when I look back at the timeline, is realizing I was moving in this negative direction and realizing I had the power within me to reverse it. Now, I admit taking those first steps in the opposite direction is one of the fucking toughest things anybody can do. It's not easy. I'm not trying to sit here and say it's easy. But you pick up certain habits, you pick up positive habits that make you feel better about yourself, and it will come your way. What those habits are, they're gonna differ for everyone. But there's two that I highly recommend anyone who's wanting to make that switch, take that turn in their life journey, and really make a change in their mindset and their conscious thought patterns. I highly recommend therapy and meditation. These were the two initial habits I picked up that completely changed my life. And I think the reason for that is, both therapy and meditation allowed me to explore my unconscious. It allowed me to see the core of where my thoughts were coming from, and through that observation I was able to defer many of the conscious negative thought patterns I had, the source of them. And so it took a while, don't get me wrong, it wasn't a overnight thing, but with enough time, I started to see why I thought about myself in certain ways, why I was having certain thoughts about myself, why I was thinking negatively about these things and those things. And I'm telling you, therapy and meditation are just insanely helpful in unlocking those areas of my brain and not just coming to the conclusions of where my problems were coming from, but also coming up with solutions, such as coming out here and, just being. It's like Carl Jung said. He said, I don't remember the exact quote, but he said, the unconscious controls every element of your life, every element of your conscious thoughts. And until you understand how to explore the unconscious, it will control you and you will look at it as fate. I remember reading that and it really just stuck with me, It really just, it clicked. And, the more I go on this journey of discovering what's within my brain and, other negative patterns I have that don't necessarily refer back to the depression I struggled with, but, just other areas. I struggle with anxiety too. The more at peace I feel, the more at peace I become with myself. Yeah. I gotta show you this view behind me, because it's fucking incredible. I'm telling you, man, if you don't know where to start, you're a little too intimidated by therapy, just come out here and meditate. I swear to God, it's like you're in another world. One thing I wanted to note too, I forgot to mention this, is I plan on making more videos about my recovery process and going just more in depth about some of the steps I took to overcome depression. And so, until that time, I'll catch y'all.